All right, we're off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Deb Hodgson. I'm a co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. And my unplanned journey over the past 6 years is what has led me here today. In the fall of 2017, we had scheduled to have our home measured for RF on our return from a hiking trip out west. I had planned to come off blood thinners, and I was aware that wireless could thicken the blood, so I thought, well, sounds like a prudent precaution to take. I had also been having issues with insomnia, constant ringing in the ears, heart arrhythmia, palpitations, tooth and jaw pain, dry eye, facial flushing, dizziness, and blood pressure issues. I had developed severe pressure headaches that felt like my brain was swollen or on fire. I had great difficulty thinking, speaking, and remembering. I even got lost several times in the town I have lived in for nearly 40 years. I did not yet know it was all related until we removed the wireless from our home and cars. My health quickly improved. My seemingly unrelated symptoms disappeared as well. Interestingly, the plant in my kitchen that sat there doing nothing for over a year suddenly grew 15 inches in just 2 months. That was an eye-opener to everyone in the family, especially my children who thought their mom might be crazy. It's much easier to believe what you can actually see. Realizing this is an issue that ultimately affects everyone, I stepped way out of my comfort zone with a little push from reading EMF Off and the support of Cece, despite knowing others will certainly think I must be crazy. I held 2 public screenings of Generation Zapped and reached out to many, including legislators. My state rep, Patrick Abrami, was truly exceptional. He actually listened and responded. He investigated the science and was successful getting New Hampshire to pass the first U.S. law to begin addressing technology safety. The New Hampshire Commission on Health and Environmental Effects of Wireless Technology was established in the fall of 2019 and produced a groundbreaking report in the fall of 2020. The New Hampshire Commission report is a great place to become informed, to empower you to protect yourself, your family, and community by becoming aware and learning how to use technology safely. We at New Hampshire for Safe Tech, along with Cece Doucette of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, are supporting the Commission's work through community information sessions like this, and we thank you for being here. Our speaker today is Cece Doucette. Cece's been a tireless supporter to us in New Hampshire and all across the country, and we are grateful to her. Welcome, Cece.
Oh, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Deb. And we are just eternally grateful for all the work that you've done up in New Hampshire. We'll talk a bit more about that New Hampshire report, but your work is really blazing the trail across the country and, in fact, across the world. The European Parliament has already hailed that New Hampshire Commission report as the one to emulate. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share, and we'll go through a series of slides tonight. And at the end, we will entertain questions and answers. So we had asked that everybody please hold your questions until the end. And when we have the rendering of this video, we will send it out along with my slides so that you'll be able to drill down into any of the information in these slides that you find important and worth investigating further on your own. So a shout out again to Deb for being here with us tonight. She has a couple of colleagues in Lori Schreier and Jen White who have really been instrumental in New Hampshire for Safe Technology as well. So thank you to all of our friends to the north of us. All right, so this little MTPW after my name simply means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University, along with a bachelor's degree in communication. And in a million years, I never would have guessed this is where my skill set would lead me. And I'm just so grateful that I do have a communication and a writing background, because I use these skills every single day in this work towards safe technology. So like many of us, I had no idea there was anything to be even to be looking at with wireless technology. And in fact, I ran 7 campaigns for our public schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts, to bring technology in when the industry was pushing in their 21st century classroom campaign. And we thought, gosh, our local budget did not have funding to get all this new technology. We didn't want our kids to fall behind. So, good doobie parents, we jumped in and started doing fundraising for wireless infrastructure, for iPads and Chromebooks and smart boards and minis, all this new tech that we thought was the way to go. And then come to find out from my friend Wendy at book group one night, she's an electrical engineer, and she was reading the book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And at book group, she started telling us that it looks like there's something wrong with wireless. And so, it was book group. So I just kind of made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, something else crossed my desk inferring the same thing. And I went, wow, if there's anything to this, I would like to know, because I literally spent 8 years bringing this into my kids' schools. So being a tech writer, I just thought, well, is there any science to this? And so I started looking, and I was shocked that you don't even have to look far to discover literally thousands of peer-reviewed published studies all over the world showing great biological harm. And in a few minutes, we'll walk you through what the long-term and short-term harm is. So I'm reading all this, and I start passing it back and forth to our school committee and our superintendent and our principals and our school nurses. And I got back crickets. And I thought, well, this is strange. I thought, when they read the evidence, they would get those kids out of the building as if we had a leak in the science classroom of some chemical. But come to find out later, the wireless industry and tech, ed tech, got in at the state level and put it such that if we don't embed all this technology into our curriculum, our schools were going to get a poor rating from the state authorities. And that in turn would affect their livelihood. If they're not, doing what the state is telling them they need to do, it could very well impact their jobs. So this was a very difficult conversation to have. But ultimately, we became the first in the nation to even have this little sign in our classroom called Best Practices for Mobile Devices. Turn these devices off when we're not using them. Only turn the Wi-Fi on, the routers, the access points, only when you need it. Right now, it's pulsating microwave radiation 24/7. And always place a mobile device on a solid surface, not on our laps, certainly not on our children's bodies. So that was back in 2014. And I was there the day that they rolled this out on the first day back to school with the staff and the faculty. And they went through the anti-bullying and the physical restraint and the mandated reporter training. And then they put up this slide. But at the end of it, I kept waiting for them to tell the teachers that this is two-way microwave radio frequency radiation that the science is showing is extraordinarily harmful, and especially to children, especially to the elderly, especially to pregnant women and fetuses, and anybody with an existing health condition. So I was a little I was grateful, first of all, that we did this much. But then I was dismayed that they didn't really get to the crux of it so that people would want to take the initiative to protect themselves. So I went to my state senator, and I had served alongside Senate President Karen Spilka when my kids were in school in our local education foundation. And so we literally spent years together bringing all this technology into our schools, running all these fundraising campaigns. So I met with my senator during her local coffee hours, and I brought the science, and I brought our little sign, and I had a radiation detection meter, and I showed her how much radiation was coming off of her and her district director's laptop. And both devices went way off the charts into the red zone. And they're looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows. I said, is there anything that you can think of from where you sit to at least give the public the right to know, just like we ultimately did with tobacco and gambling and pornography and drugs and alcohol? Adults will make their choices, but everybody deserves to have a right to know, and we are morally obliged to protect our children. So she put me with a lawyer in her office at the State House, and together we crafted a little bill that would just simply say, let's get the right minds together at the state level, form a commission, and address this, decide what to do. Well, we've had bills here in Massachusetts going on 10 years now. And although we've succeeded in getting some of them out of the first committees, we've never enacted a bill into law for protections around technology safety. But as Deb said, we had these same conversations with her state representative, Patrick Abrami, and we brought in the experts, and we brought in citizens who have been harmed, and we brought in the scientists, and ultimately New Hampshire became the first in the nation to address this, and we'll give you more details on that. So along this journey, Dr. Deborah Davis reached out to me. She's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She helped to get cigarettes out of our airplanes. She's one of our country's leading scientists, and she did a lot of work at the federal level with our government agencies. She reached out to me, and some folks in the UK had realized what was happening with wireless and realized we can't fix it until we educate people about it. So Dr. Davis put me in touch with Brett and Lynn West in the UK, along with one of the leading scientists out of Finland, Dr. Mikko Ahonen. And the four of us hit it hard, and we built online training that can be completed in about a half an hour. We can literally train our schools, our school administrators, our faculty, our staff, and the more mature students, literally in about a half an hour tomorrow. So we've got the training ready to go there. And then when my bill came up to the Senate, I went out and went to the State House. Dr. Deborah Davis actually brought a panel of experts to the Massachusetts State House in 2015 or 2016, asking for right to know legislation. And I was just so pleasantly surprised to walk into a room at the State House where it was wall-to-wall people who understood this issue, because for the first 2 years, I didn't have anybody I could talk to. I was completely self-taught, and I wasn't really even sure what I thought I knew. So it was so gratifying to go to the State House, walk into this room, and find people all over the state of Massachusetts who understood this issue. And so ultimately, we kind of banded together and formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So we've built out this website. If you go to our resources page, you will find all of the science. You'll find all the military studies that were done decades ago showing great biological harm. You will find pages on cancer, pages on Wi-Fi in schools, pages on the impact to children, pages on the manufacturers and what their big tobacco playbook looks like. So we have amassed this great volume of information that links off to other organizations that have been working so hard on this. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants who have been dealing and addressing this for decades. So once a month, we do a planning update meeting, Massachusetts for Safe Technology. It's usually on the third Wednesday of every month at noon Eastern time. And our purpose is to bring people together who are working on this at the local level, compare notes, give updates on what's happening in our communities and how people are moving the needle towards safe technology. We have people from Massachusetts, from all over the US, Europe, Canada. Anybody is welcome to come join us for these meetings. This next link I like to include because it's hard opening this conversation with people because the industry got such a head start in convincing us that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go. And now people have invested great amounts of money. They bought all these cool gadgets and they live on their technology. So it is a hard conversation to start in many cases. Although today, I think a lot more people are starting to recognize there's something really wrong here, but they don't have the facts to back up that intuition. So I was so grateful when somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would please co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. This was a conference of doctors, of hospitals, of urban planners and architects and builders and federal agencies that all came together to talk about how do we get back to having a healthy building indoors and outdoors. And for the first time, we got to address the biological effects of today's wireless technology. And it was such an honor to invite Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And some of the scientists approached him back in Canada and showed him the radiation in his own home. 30 years in the tech industry, he had no idea what we were doing as far as safety goes. So bless Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. He's now retired. And he went and sought a dozen of the world's leading experts whose life's work is investigating in science with microwave radiation, electromagnetic fields, radio frequency. It's all the same thing. It's this man-made light energy form that carries our signals and our data back and forth invisibly, but it's doing a number on our biological cells. So Frank Clegg came to say his industry can absolutely do better, but they need to be given a nudge. And that's what you and I are responsible for at the local level, to start building that pressure from the grassroots up. We also had Dr. Martin Pall with us, P-A-L-L, and he's one of the world's leading scientists who has gleaned the massive scientific evidence, and he's done all these review papers to show collectively what all these studies are telling us. And he's identified many of the biological mechanisms of harm, because for years the industry would say, oh, you know, there's no mechanism of harm identified, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. And when we get to our science pages, we'll talk about what those mechanisms of harm are. We also had with us a really interesting gentleman by the name of Peter Sullivan. Now, Peter, in his younger years, had been a fighter pilot, kind of like Top Gun. So he was up there way up high above the earth where the natural electromagnetic fields are very high. And then he's in a fighter plane that's got all this radar built into the plane, and then all the electromagnetic fields inside the plane from all the instrumentation. So Peter wound up getting really sick. He started dropping some scary weight. His teeth started getting brittle. When his two sons came into the preschool years, both of them presented on the autism spectrum. So Peter was an engineer in Silicon Valley, and like his friends invented the cell phones and stuff. So he knew his way around Silicon Valley. And when he started investigating the autism, he did what many families will do: go to a clean organic diet to stop putting chemicals into the body. He even went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to get those pollutants out of the brain and other places in the body where they store up. And then third, he figured out that it was critically important to do a digital detox. And today when he lectures, he tells people, start with that digital detox, at least a 12-hour, no radio frequency, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no Chromebooks, nothing radiating during those 12 hours when the children need to sleep and do cell repair and regeneration. And what I learned from Peter Sullivan is that his sons are now adults, and neither of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was an option. And we don't want to give false hope. We know every body is biologically different, but we see great inroads when we remove these toxic exposures that pulsate this microwave radiation at millions and billions of cycles per second. And people will say, oh, but you know, the earth has electromagnetic fields, so it must be fine. Well, there's a gentleman whose last name was Schumann, and we now have something called Schumann's resonance. He figured out how many times per second the earth pulses these beautiful healing electrons up for us to regulate everything that's connected to the earth. Well, Schumann's resonance identified that the Earth pulses these beautiful electrons 7.83 times per second. Now that we've gotten so fancy with our digital technology, when we talk about megahertz, that means 1 million pulsations of spiked erratic microwave radiation jacked at our cells per second. Now that we're getting up into the gigahertz range, that's 1 billion times per second that we are jacking our cells and our brains and our immune system with microwave radiation, 1 billion times per second. And that's what our routers run off of, our phones, these new antennas they're putting up outside our homes for 5G and the Internet of Things. As Dr. Martin Blank and his son Ari indicated in their book called Overpowered, we are simply overpowering ourselves, our pets, our pollinators, and every other living cell on this planet with microwave radiation. So Theodora Scarrato, who is the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, that's the nonprofit that Dr. Deborah Davis, the Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate, founded. Theodora is the executive director of that today, and she spoke with us at the NIH, and she gave wonderful examples of other countries that are already doing something about this. There are schools in Italy and Belgium and Israel who are taking the Wi-Fi out because children are so vulnerable to this radiation. So all of our talks at the NIH were limited to 10 minutes each. So this is a really good quick hit of highly credible information if you would like to share that with others when you invite them into the conversation. Now, one of the major gaps that we had when I first fell down the rabbit hole with this back in 2013 is we were starting to see so many people presenting with microwave sickness symptoms, but they would go to their doctors, and like Deb did, you know, these doctors haven't been trained. They don't know what tests to run to diagnose electromagnetic illnesses. And then you wind up paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go see a specialist who runs the tests they know how to run. But if they haven't been trained on this, then where are we, right? So we were so grateful to have this EMF medical conference. It began in 2021. It just wrapped up in July of 2023, and it was online and available for 24.5 continuing medical education credits. The accreditation period is now concluded, but Elizabeth Kelly, who was the executive director of this conference, she in time will work to make the videos still available. So even though you can't get credit, you can still be professionally trained on this. And other doctors are starting to weave this into other conferences, like for the heart and the brain and other, you know, other groups that get together to study their specialties. So we're very grateful. So just to recap on a few of the terms, EMF means electromagnetic field of, in this case, microwave radio frequency radiation. Sometimes that's called RF or RFR, but it's all man-made microwaves that we really ought not to be playing with. So what caused my schools to become the first in the country to even hang this little sign in our classrooms? I think it was when they read the legal fine print and had a legal uh-oh moment, like, uh-oh, you mean they've been telling us about this forever and we never knew? So anybody who's with us right now, I invite you to bring out an iPhone, if you have an iPhone, and go into settings. I use the iPhone as an example because I know right where it is in that one. But in all of our devices, if you type in the make and model of your device and then type in RF exposure for radio frequency exposure, you'll see something similar to what we're going to go through right now. And our friends at Environmental Health Trust put up this page called See the Fine Print, where you can see, for example, the iPads. When they first came out, they had disclaimers in there talking about the harm it can do and that people are having seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And I know personally 2 families locally here whose children had their first seizures while using a tablet. So this is very serious. So from settings in an iPhone, go down a little ways and hit general. On a really old phone, you would have hit about, and it was kind of cool because then we could have this acronym GAL, like this gal taught me how to find this in my phone. But now that they've taken away the 3G waves from our phones, they're repurposing them for 5G. That about is no longer applicable. So go straight from general down to the bottom where you see legal and regulatory. When you hit that, you'll get another menu come up, and about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. That's two-way radio frequency, man-made microwave radiation that they politely call energy. And when we read that legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you are putting that phone in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or you're tucking it in your waistband, or if you're putting it in your back pocket, you are exceeding the Federal Communications guidelines. It's not even a regulation or a standard. It's a guideline for public radiation exposure limits. And by the way, those limits were never tested for biological safety, only for how much heat it would take to raise the temperature of gel inside of a mannequin's head. Well, you and I know that what's inside of our head is far more complex than a bowl of gel. So it tells us right there. And in a couple paragraphs below, it says, hey, if you want to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. And they suggest a speakerphone or a headset. And I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second just to show you the solution on the headset. So, you know, we made these problems. We can fix them. We have solutions at every turn. So what I'm going to show you here is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And again, we'll give you the recording. So some people love to take notes. I do because I'm a writer, so it's how I process. But just know we'll be providing with all this information. This is a hollow tube headset. Notice that it just has rubber up at the tips. There's no metal. The reason being is that one of the properties with microwave radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you're putting earbuds right up to your brain, or if you're putting, you know, one of these things came to market and it had magnets on it. And I thought, that's cool. You can just hang it around your neck when you're not using it. But then when you put it to your head, you're putting a magnet right up to your head, which is metal, which is going to amplify all the ambient radiation. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. These little ferrite beads break the radiation, and then all you get is good acoustics through a hollow tube up to your head. It's got a little mute and audio for control there, and then a nice long cord so you can put your device far away from your body if you have to make a call. One of the other things that I wish they would tell us in that legal fine print is they give us these devices with multiple antennas radiating, whether you're using that service or not. So for all the different services that they've given us, cellular and data, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, locator, hotspot, and for anybody who didn't know better and already got talked into upgrading to a 5G phone, there are additional antennas in there. Each one is constantly radiating this microwave radiation, pulsing these spiked signals to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. And if we're not using all these antennas, once we know, why would we leave ourselves in that field of electropollution when we know, okay, it's invisible, but we know it's there? And one of the hardest things for me was to get my mind around this invisible toxin. And then I learned there are radio frequency detection meters that help us to identify where this electropollution is. And so here in my house, we are usually below 10. See how it's usually in the green here? I have somebody in the house right now in the basement who's using a cell phone. So that's why it's bleeding through my floor and coming up and flashing every now and then. But usually, like right now, it's at 8.7. And that flashing green is as good as we can get today. But I want to give you a live demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode. And all those little antennas in here, sorry, I'm looking at reverse. individually, they are looking to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. And look how we are flashed up into the bright red there. And we are at just astronomical levels of microwave radiation. I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. And with some of the products like Apple, you literally need to turn your Wi-Fi and your Bluetooth antennas off. If they just say not connected, that's not good enough, because that means it's still over there throwing out microwave signals saying, here I am, here I am, here I am, but it's not connecting to anything. So make sure that those antennas are off, and then only turn on the one antenna when you need it, and then go right back into airplane mode. And we were at 8 and the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, like in 3 feet of air, how much radiation am I exposed to? We were at 8 in my home a minute ago. We want to be under 10. I turned on my cell phone, and you may not be able to see that. It's the middle number on that display that we are concerned with. That's the max. That's the spike of microwave radiation that hits our cells and does the damage. We went from 8 to 1,450,000 microwatts per square meter. And the science wants us to be at 10 or less. So let me go back to my screen share, and we'll start taking us through the science. But I want to give you encouragement at every turn. So when I first started learning about this, my brain goes right to solutions. I knew our town had a pot of money that they turned around and distributed as grants. It took me 3 grant cycles and educating all of our select board members one by one, showing them the science. I wanted 2 meters. I wanted a grant for 2 meters, one for our public schools and one for our library. So anybody could take this meter out, go do their gap analysis, measure, and then learn how to begin stepping back from that radiation. So it was not an easy conversation again, but once I met with everybody and taught them, they actually gave me the $400 funding grant to get one of these meters for our library. This is the one the Ashland Public Library has. Our citizens can take it out for a week or 2, go home, go to their office, go to their cars, go to their kids' schools, and just start getting the data. How much radiation are we exposing ourselves and our loved ones to? Then at the medical conference, I met a doctor from Newton, Massachusetts. We flew all the way out to California for the 2019 conference. I met Dr. Judy Safrir there. We came back and worked on a state level grant together. And that was in Newton, Massachusetts. And we did some programming around that. We showed an award-winning film called Generation Zapped, and that's later in my slides too. And we became the 2nd library in the country to put one on loan. And since then, people have said, wow, I love that idea. And they've started talking to their libraries. And most libraries today now have a library of things. Like my daughter just borrowed a power washer from her library. I got the idea to put a meter on loan in our library because when Eversource, our utility company, came in with these, they wanted to replace the incandescent light bulbs with energy saving bulbs, those swirly CFLs. Well, you should know those throw off a lot of dirty electricity, another man-made form of a bad electromagnetic field. But as part of their marketing campaign, they put a kilowatt meter on loan in our library. So I knew our library already had one kind of meter on loan, and that was so citizens could take it home, measure how much energy it took to run their incandescent light bulb, compare it to these new CFL light bulbs and say, gee, I'm going to save X number of dollars a year. Of course, I'm going to buy the new technology. Well, don't take everything at face value, folks. So we became the first, Newton became the second, a bunch of others around the country are doing this. And out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon put a cell tower on top of the neighborhood. The day they turn that antenna, or it's licensed for 48 big macro antennas, they had 6 mounted so far. They turned on 6 antennas. And children and adults and pets started getting very sick to the point where they had to abandon their homes. And out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, their library just bought this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter here for $400 and put it into circulation in their library. So it's not a big reach today to ask our libraries to do this community service and put this instrument on loan in our libraries. And we can help your library with some of the paperwork and stuff that we did around that. So again, there are solutions for everything, but getting the education out there is the first step. And to that end, our local cable station has been wonderful. They love it when citizens come to them and say, hey, would you guys help with the project? So they sent somebody to my home with a camera. We did a 23-minute walkthrough of my home, and I show where common exposures are today. Like my printer, who knew it had 3 antennas in it, and it just radiated all the time until I knew to go into settings, just like you go into your phone and go into settings and find all those antennas and just turn them off. And the solution is not rocket science. This is how we always used to connect to the internet, with an Ethernet cable. Most folks are grateful to know that if you just go to your router, modem router, and you look, it's got Ethernet ports in it on the back or the bottom. You can simply plug back in with an Ethernet cable. And then if your device doesn't have an Ethernet plug on it, you can get little adapters. Like this is the Lightning to RJ45 Ethernet adapter that plugs right into my iPhone. So anything I'm doing on my iPhone on the internet, I can now do safely through an Ethernet connection. And the best news is, 1, you'll be much healthier. And 2, you get a far faster signal through a cabled connection because your information's not dissipating and flying out through the air. It's coming through a strict cable. 3, it's far more reliable. The service is so much better with a hardwired connection. 4, it consumes far less energy. There was a Greenpeace analyst back in 2012 who said that if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. That's what our technology's done to us. And that was 10 years ago. Imagine how much energy we're consuming through our technology today. And we know how to cut back on that. So I'm also very grateful. So feel free to use this link here to go off to this public service announcement where I do a walkthrough of the home. And then in Worcester, Massachusetts, WCCA TV invited me to have my own Tech Safe series. And every couple of weeks I go into the studio and I invite guests in to share their stories with us, from scientists to doctors to citizens, and tell how this wireless radiation has impacted their homes. These are all 28-minute episodes. And as I add people to my distribution list, you'll get that. And that way you can stay up to date with what's happening, because as we'll show in a minute, we simply don't get this information through mainstream media because it's owned by these industries. Okay, so what does the science tell us? Let's first look at the long-term effects. And for years, the industry would say, oh, you know, there's no mechanism of harm identified, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. And back as far as 2011, the World Health Organization classified this electromagnetic field radio frequency as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. There's 5 levels. The bottom 2, there was already enough evidence to say, no, we know more than that. So they put it in this middle category, which is in the same category as lead, thalidomide, chloroform, and a whole bunch of other horrid chemicals that we still allow in this country. And what was missing at the time in 2011 when they did that classification was the animal studies, the rodent studies. And since then, wonderful organizations have completed those rodent studies. One of them being our own government, the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. They did a study for 2 decades. They went in expecting to prove that cell phones were safe because that was the new technology of the day back then. And instead, at the end of the day, they discovered clear evidence of cancerous tumors, DNA damage, and a host of other harmful findings. Clear evidence is the top of 5 categories that they could assign. The industry gets a hold of these studies and says, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study. Well, right on the heels of our national toxicology program, which is arguably the gold standard around the world on toxics research, clear evidence of cancerous tumors. The Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study on the cell towers. So now we've got both ends of the connection, and both of these large multi-million-dollar studies concluded cancers, DNA damage, and more. So we don't need more science. We need an informed public, and we need public policy to start representing the science. So DNA damage, you know, that is the roadmap to grow a proper anything. And when we start damaging our DNA, we can expect a host of illnesses, just like we've been seeing of late. When I started reading the infertility studies, this is what got me on my feet. They've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, or programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure to a laptop. And I'm over there just scratching my head going, you've got to be kidding me. At that point in time, my oldest daughter had gone up to college with her MacBook. My youngest daughter had just gone into high school, and for Christmas, we gave her a laptop for Christmas, thinking we would give her a leg up. And then come to find out, it's damaging our reproductive organs. And where are both my daughters using it, but right on top of their ovaries. So that was the day that I plucked up the courage to start coming out of my comfort zone and talking about this issue, looking for people who knew more than I did and looking for help to get our children protected. And since then, you know, there are many other studies. There's a really good study out of Kaiser Permanente that shows greater increases in miscarriages from women who are using wireless technology. So we don't need more science. We have a big body of science on neurotoxicity. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OB/GYN program at Yale University Medical School. And Dr. Taylor has done these rodent studies and exposed the pregnant mice to this man-made radiation, and found that when the pups were born, they came out bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child with attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between the science and what's happening to the families in her care because of microwave radiation. And then Alzheimer's. Dr. Martin Pall has studied the science on Alzheimer's, and we are now seeing that where, like cancer, it used to take decades to surface, and people maybe in their 70s or 80s would start getting Alzheimer's. We're now seeing it in our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and even in some rare cases to, you know, adolescents in their 20s with Alzheimer's. This is a neurodegenerative toxin. So it's really hard because mainstream media is owned by these corporate giants, and they do not report on this by and large. So we're very grateful when more mainstream groups start reporting on this. I learned about the Environmental Working Group as a mom back when they started coming out with these 2 lists that they put out on pesticides every year called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, advising us which produce we should really try and get grown organically if we can, and which others have been tested. And maybe if they're grown with the commercial chemicals, maybe it doesn't actually penetrate into the food so badly. So I knew of Environmental Working Group a long time ago, and they have now gotten funding to start reporting on this radio frequency, wireless radiation trouble that we're in. And they've come out with some really good fact sheets at the Environmental Working Group, protecting kids from wireless radiation in school and at home. They did another one on the nervous system, on the neurotoxicity. So we're very grateful to those who are coming mainstream with this. And then we've got to understand children are not just little adults. Everything about them is still under development. Their immune system, their central nervous system, their skulls, their brains, their eyes, all of it is especially vulnerable on a growing child. So with great thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues, they did a modeling study to show us this invisible toxin and how far it penetrates into our brain. You know, I used to be on the phone with my mom for a couple hours at a time because she lived on the West Coast, I live on the East Coast, and it was really hard to find the time. So when we caught up, we would yak for a couple hours, and I would get off the phone and go, God, my head feels so wonky. Well, I had put the decked cordless phone in a pocket, and then I put a wired earpiece with a wire running right up to my brain, and I talked for 2 hours and wonder why I was feeling awful at the end of that call. Well, look at how far this radiation goes into your brain and mine. On a 10-year-old child, it is penetrating that brain almost 3/4 of the way through. And on a 5-year-old child, it is immersing that microwave radiation into that brain almost the entire way through. And that's because children's brains have a higher water content and they have thinner skulls. So where we have a nice, tough noggin here, still it's getting in. But on a child, they just don't stand a chance. So we need to really get on this and start protecting our kids. So it's nice when we talk about the short-term effects now, because a lot of people recognize them once they simply learn to connect the dots. So it's important to note that for almost 20 years, the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized that this man-made microwave radiation is causing illness. And the ADA already has advisories for electromagnetic sensitivities and accommodations. So the good news is after a training session like this, people will come back to me and say, Cece, I didn't want to know this. And I certainly didn't want to believe it because I live my life on my device. And so again, we want to underscore the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And every time we teach the risks, we teach how to remediate. So time and again, people will come back and say, wow, I took your advice. I created a sleep sanctuary. I turned everything off at night. And oh my gosh, I slept for the first time in ages. Or my children's behavior issues started calming way down when we're not jackhammering ourselves with microwaves. So insomnia, so many people don't sleep right anymore at all ages. And come to find out from the science, what's happening is we are beings of light. Our whole body runs off of the light cycle with our circadian rhythm from light to dark. And in the wee hours of darkness, our brain waits for the darkness to release melatonin from the pineal gland. The melatonin would normally go in and regulate our sleep cycle, but also help clean up the everyday, debris from cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. Well, unfortunately, the brain cannot distinguish between this man-made light energy form that's pulsating at us all night and natural daylight. So our brain's over there going, when's it going to get dark? When can I release that melatonin? So in many cases, for many people, this microwave radiation really disrupts our sleep, but how easy to fix it. Just turn this stuff off, especially at night. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, chronic fatigue like we haven't never experienced before, pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities, heating, flushing, rashes, tingling. It turns out that we have little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to navigate through our world. And when we are bombarded with microwaves, it can start showing up in our skin as well as all of our other organs. Heartbeats, we are electrical beings. That's why we do EEGs and EKGs to monitor the electrical signaling in our body. And if we bombard ourselves with microwaves, we're in for some pretty unusual results. Cognitive impairment, where we just can't think right. And now scientifically, we know another mechanism of harm. We have something called the blood-brain barrier around our brain. That is a membrane that keeps toxins out of this sensitive area of the brain. What the science is showing is this spiked erratic pulsation of microwave radiation beating at us is permeating or opening up that blood-brain barrier. So now when toxins should be escorting out through the blood, they can take a turn into our brain. And when we pollute the environment of the brain, we can expect all of these neurological issues. And it was just so hard to hear at the medical conference where the doctors are telling us if we don't stop this, we can expect many more of these anger outbursts in our society, these behavioral issues, like these mass shootings. I know when our kids finally went back into the classroom after COVID-19, we were having 3 different schools reported in the news that these children were literally beating on each other with their Chromebooks. I just learned last week of a teacher who got beaten by a child with a Chromebook to the point where she was out from a concussion. So we are damaging the gray matter and the white matter of our brains where we would normally make reasonable decisions. And all of this, even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression in all of our highly technologically advanced nations, suicidal ideation, like we have never seen even among children. We are polluting the brain with microwaves. And unfortunately, it's not just you and I, it really is every biological cell on the planet is meant to be synchronized with the Earth's really lovely healing electromagnetic field. But all of our flying creatures and others, they have a symbiotic relationship with the Earth as well. The birds, the bees, the pollinators, they all have their own little mechanisms with magnetic fields that help them to navigate where they're going using the Earth as their compass. And now we put this giant layer of electrosmog in there. And if the microwaves aren't outright just killing them, it's disrupting their navigation patterns. For our pollinators, it's not just the neonicotinoids, it's microwaves as well. Birds, for example, when they were testing 5G in The Hague in the Netherlands, as soon as they started sending these signals out, hundreds of birds literally dropped from the sky, either stunned or killed from these microwaves. And as I said, the energy consumption is huge. There are other resources where you can learn all of the human atrocities that go into extracting the minerals out of the earth that we need. Who knew there are dozens of minerals that go into every one of our devices? If we understood the human atrocities to get those minerals, we would never allow the industry to seduce us into getting the new shiny object and just chucking our old one aside. We would commit to using everything to its full and useful life and then recycling at the end of the cycle. The data warehouses, the networks, our own devices, every time we sit there and watch something while it's streaming, we send and receive, we charge and recharge and recharge. All of this and sending messages and doing continuous updates in the background. All these apps that we thought were so cool, if we're honest with ourselves, we really don't use them. And the ones we do use, get rid of everything else, right? Otherwise, they are continually using energy to run in the background. So lots of good hacks we can all teach for ourselves. You know, like I said, I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. I don't need it. I use it for emergency purposes, and that's it. But when I was learning about all this, I kept scratching my head going, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. If this is as bad as little me can find out just by doing my research, somebody's got to be looking out for us. Well, in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this amazing free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And it finally clicked with me what this image is that they chose. It's a revolving door. And this is what has happened to many of our federal agencies, where we used to have qualified scientists and experts who would get in there and do the real science and the research. They've now been replaced by industry. So captains of industry have come in and taken over the positions, for example, at the FCC, at the FDA. And so this was my missing puzzle piece. And I thought, holy smokes, nobody at the federal agency is looking out for us. And that's when I doubled down on my resolve to start working really hard locally, and then at the state level, and start meeting with the federal or the local and state agencies to teach them, because we all got blindsided by this. But then last November, ProPublica came out with another really good article reaffirming that the FCC is shielding those cell phone companies instead of protecting public safety. So remember that $30 million study I told you about, where our own government, through the National Toxicology Program, did this massive study. It's the biggest study on anything they've ever done. And they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. That was supposed to trigger public policy to catch up to the science. Instead, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, who's in charge of the radiology or radiation area of the Food and Drug Administration, it was actually 20 years ago, the FDA that commissioned that study. He went over to the FCC and said, oh, well, we don't really believe that study, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, one might ask, what would possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, let's go look into his background. Guess what we find? He's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. So he should have been nowhere near that NTP study, but that's the level of corruption that our federal government is caught up in right now. So there is no cavalry coming. And it goes, unfortunately, all the way to the top, to the World Health Organization. I was giving a presentation to the Health and Wellness Committee at Dover Sherborne School District next door to me. And we were sitting in a conference room with maybe a dozen people around the table. And as I'm presenting the facts, one of the members was fact checking me on his iPad. And he said, well, look, the World Health Organization and the New York Times all say this is just like nothing. It's all fine. And I said, well, how would you know? Because when you do a search, this is what comes up. It's inconclusive. But how would you know that because these major studies have now been completed, concluding clear evidence of harm, that the World Health Organization has reopened their investigation, and they are working on what's happening with cancer, what's happening with infertility, what's happening with electrosensitivities, what's happening to the environment, to children. But you'll be hard-pressed to find that on their website, because as it turns out, we've learned there are two groups, even at the World Health Organization. One is the group of qualified experts, the scientists, the doctors who are trying to get this done right. The other is a group that's run by industry, just like our FCC and our FDA. So sadly, this goes all the way up with conflicts of interest as high as the World Health Organization. And this will bring you up to this page that you can look at for yourself. So guys, that's a lot of the bad news. But like I said, there are solutions at every turn. We just have to come out of our comfort zone and realize that we do have control over a lot of this under our own roof. So like I said, look at the back of your router. get Ethernet cables again. I still had a big box of them down in my basement. So I just went rummaging around, and lo and behold, we just hook it up to the router, Ethernet cable. By today, almost all of us have multiple devices in our home. So you want to get like an extension cord for electronics, and that's something called an Ethernet switch. It's a little tiny box. This one allows you to hook up 4 devices plus the main cable to your router. And in a classroom, you could get one that has 20 or 30 ports in it, and you can hardwire a classroom and turn off all of those radio frequency antennas. So for each of your individual devices, just get another little Ethernet cable, the appropriate adapter, plug it into your device. So that's the hardwiring part. Then you have to remember to go in and turn off the antennas, because the way that we're set up today, it doesn't automatically disable the antennas, but I'm pretty sure our engineers could figure that one out if they're tasked to do it. But today you have to go in and turn them off manually. And when I said that I don't use a cell phone, remember, this is mobile technology. It was never meant to be used indoors. So I simply went into the settings of my phone and discovered there's a button in there. I can tell it what phone number to forward my cell phone calls to my landline. Easy enough, didn't cost me a penny. So most people in my world know to just call me straight out on my landline, because I might check my cell phone once or twice a week, but I really don't use it unless I go out on emergencies. And the same thing with the laptops, the tablets, your gaming devices, your baby monitors, all of it should be hardwired. And then you just go in and turn off all those antennas. But because of 5G and the Internet of Things, they're now looking to put antennas in everything that we buy. This is a new revenue stream for them, because then they can harvest our data, and then they can sell that to third-party manufacturers who want to sell you product. Some people think that's a really horrible idea, because they can also take that and infringe upon your privacy and data security. So it's important to measure and make sure that you got everything. And I'll give you an example that we just had. Our stove, our range that we'd had for 25 years bit the dust, and we needed to get a new one. So my husband found this floor model at a really great discount, and it got delivered to the house, and I looked at it, and it had like a Wi-Fi logo on it with some sort of smart technology. And a girlfriend of mine had moved into a new home and bought all new appliances, and we could go right into her settings and turn off all those antennas. Well, in my stove, I went into the settings and I could not find the RF exposure. So then I pull out the manual and I discover that it doesn't look like I can control that, but I did find the RF exposure disclaimer. And in it said, stay, I think it was like 20 centimeters away from this radiation. And I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. What am I supposed to stand in the middle of my kitchen with a super long spatula to cook my food? So we've just lost our minds with this. So I wound up having to call a technician to come to the house, and I have my meter. So I said, in my house on this meter, we're usually at 10 microwatts or less. And he wasn't really interested in learning any of that. But I said, look, this stove is emitting at 1,000,090, and I can't have that in my house. So he was a little grumpy. And I said, do you want me to measure your phone? He says, no. He says, I'll just go wait out in my van. I got to call for tech support. So he goes and he calls his engineer and comes back in, and he takes off the back of my stove. And behind the digital display on the stove is the motherboard. Well, right next to that motherboard was this little tiny board that hooked into the motherboard with just a little plug. That was the radio frequency antenna. He just unplugged it. And I measured again with my meter, went way back down, and I was under 10 again in my home. And then he starts talking to me, and he says, you know what? I don't buy anything that's digital today. I get the good old-fashioned appliances. And I said, yeah, but everywhere you go, to Lowe's or Home Goods or Home Depot, it's all these new gadgets. And he says, no, I just buy mine online. I get the lower end of the line. I said, well, thank you for that tip. And then he said, thank you. I learned something today. So even when somebody's grumpy, if you're presenting the information in a polite way, maybe they'll come on board with you. So we've talked about our own devices and ways that we can reduce our exposures, but we also need to understand that these industries are foisting this microwave radiation on us in ways that perhaps we cannot control. One of them is our utility smart meters or digital meters. So when I was a little girl, I'm one of 10 kids, and we did a lot of hide and seek out in the yard. And with 10 kids, you could be sitting there hiding out for a while. And I just remember sitting there in the bushes, watching all the little dials go around on our utility meters. And that's how they were measuring our consumption of gas, water, electric. Today it's solar or propane. Those were good analog meters. They lasted like 40 or 50 years, and it was just a simple mechanical device. And we had employees of the town or the utility company that would walk through the neighborhood and take down the reading, and that's how they would bill you. Well, in recent years, the industry has come in and said, oh, wow, we can save your town some money. You won't have to pay the meter readers anymore. We'll do it digitally. And so our towns thought, cool, a cost save, right? I mean, who wouldn't think that's cool? But they have put these radio frequency radiation antennas on our homes without informed consent. And I mentioned that one of the properties of this radiation is it likes metal. It amplifies with metal. So you've got this radio frequency signal mounted on your house that can now hop on the wires of your house. It can hop on the pipes of your house, travel all along, and turn your entire premises into a big giant radiating antenna. So they're really not smart at all. And they pulse this radiation continuously. You know, the industry will say, oh, it's just like 6 seconds a day. Well, again, get a meter with your neighbors, get one for your library, get one for yourself, but go measure. I measured as I was preparing to testify before the Department of Public Utilities here in Massachusetts. I sat down on my dining room floor where we have an electric meter mounted, and then next to it we have a second electric meter for our solar system. And inside my home, I measured, and when I did the math on how often those spikes of microwave radiation were coming, it was 17,000 times a day. And that is horrific. So there's also been many, many reports of fires, and you can't just, if it's an electrical fire like this, you can't just pull out the hoses. You've got to get in touch with the power company, and it could take up to an hour to get all that turned off. And by then the fire has gone wild. So there are a lot of problems with these smart systems. And again, the data harvesting and privacy. And at the medical conference, they said when these smart meters go in, this is one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness. This is also a huge environmental justice issue. These polluter industries are prone to going into largely underprivileged racial minority communities where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. They don't have time to tune into these issues. So they'll roll out this toxic infrastructure, and then they'll turn around and say, hey, look, we were so successful in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut. Jump on the bandwagon, man. You guys are falling behind. Get on it. This is great. Well, they're not telling them that they ran into huge cost overruns by the millions that they then wanted to turn around and slap our ratepayers or our customers with to pay for their inappropriate management of this system. So our Attorney General's office got involved on the economic end of it, but here's where we have to be careful on the health end of it. If you have people spending time anywhere near these meters, they are getting inundated with microwaves. And if you live in a multi-unit dwelling like an apartment or a condo complex, you could be subject to a bank of these meters. And we know people who have gotten very, very sick from this. So there are so many things wrong with these smart meters. Jeremy Johnson was a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife was a medical doctor. Both of them got suddenly very, very sick, and her medical experience couldn't help them to understand why. It turned out that a bank of smart meters went in at their condo. So Jeremy did a TEDx talk that, you know, those are only about 15 minutes. This is a really good one, especially for engineers and physicists and technologists who've only been taught you have to have heat from a device to have harm. That's what the FCC set those astronomical limits at, is heating. And we now know the harm is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below that. So that's a good link to share with people. And Jeremy Johnson's got a lot of great information on his website. He talks about products. You know, people often reach out when they're first learning about this saying, hey, if I put this sticker on my phone, or if I use this product or crystal, am I going to be safe? You got to remove the exposures. There could be some other things that might help to strengthen your own biome, but muscle testing is one of the best ways to figure out if something's going to strengthen you or short you out. Because for what works for my body might not work for yours. So always do some testing before you buy any products. Dr. Alexia McKnight is this veterinarian radiologist who got so sick from the smart meter that she couldn't remember at a stoplight whether she was supposed to stop or go. And she works with radiation, and she had no idea that Wi-Fi was dangerous. She got taken down by a smart meter, and she too has done a TED Talk. So cell towers and smart meters. So in Massachusetts on the smart meters, we have two major companies, Eversource and National Grid. National Grid does have an opt-out, but you have to pay for it. When people get sick, they lose their income, they lose their circle of friends, they lose their family, and they become shut-ins. And now to make them pay for a public utility service is outrageous. Vermont already has a no-fee opt-out. That's a good first step, but really we should simply be hardwiring these smart meters or these digital meters or any kind of meter to the home, and then no radio frequency antennas. So that's the smart meter issue. Cell towers. It's critically important to start learning what the real science says and not what the industry spin is. So when I started researching all of this, being a tech writer, I wanted to go back and look at other sources that I had seen before, and then I couldn't find them. And so I got way in over my head. And so I thought, well, let me just gather the data. And so I built a simple research repository called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were, but here's my journey on how I came to understand them. So I've got a bunch of different pages. I tried to categorize it through the different ways that we look at the lens of this. And on my cell towers page, you can look at some of the science that shows we should never have a cell tower or a small cell antenna or any of this equipment within 500 meters of where we live, where we work, where we worship, where we play, where we go to school, where we go for medical care. There's in the scientific literature and the epidemiological studies which show what's happening in society. There's this curve of death and neurotoxicity and other symptoms that starts to come down at 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet. It starts coming down at that point. It doesn't actually catch up with general population statistics on those illnesses or death rates until almost double that. So we should never have this equipment close to where we live or spend our time. So here in the US, you can go to a website called antennasearch.com and put in an address, and it will give you a return of a 3-mile radius of how many cell towers and then how many of these big massive antennas are mounted either on buildings or on these towers. So when I was testifying before our State House, I put in the State House address on Beacon Street in Boston, and I was just, my eyes were so big to see there were 1,520 cell towers within a 3-mile radius of our State House. And that includes more than 4,500 of these big antennas. Now, mind you, these things project for miles. So imagine what all that electrosmog looks like. And this, all these dots on this map show that. And then this is just one neighborhood in Hyde Park in Boston. Look at the electropollution that we have allowed into our neighborhoods. So the big cell towers started off way off in industrial parks, nowhere near where we spend our time. And then they just gradually encroached closer and closer until they started putting them on our buildings If you can paint it the same color of the building, the law allows for that. It's terrible. So now we have 5G small cells. 5G in its simplest form means 5th generation technology. It came after 4G or 4th generation and so on. Sounds innocuous enough, but it's really a whole new layer of microwave radiation. Right now, all of our signals that reach you indoors are coming in off these longer wavelengths that can penetrate through objects, including yourself, to get to your device. They've pretty much maximized all the new revenue that they can get off of those waves. They've tapped them out pretty much. So now what they're doing is they're saying, well, we can improve service. We can give you faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways, all this cool new technology. But when you look, go look, who's buying up the entertainment industry? It's the same companies selling us all these products and pushing in all this infrastructure. So the wireless industry is buying up the entertainment industry as they push all these sexy streaming services at us. So 5G won't fly on its own. It still needs today the backbone of these 3G and 4G cell towers. And now they're adding on another wavelength. There's something called the electromagnetic spectrum that shows us, how long the wavelengths are for all of our services and how fast they come at us, so the frequency and the length of the waves. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And the industry is saying, yeah, but we'll get to do so many great things. But the crux of it is these little millimeter waves don't go very far. They get stopped by objects like buildings or like leaves or like rain or snow will disrupt their signals. So what's their solution? More cell towers. So they want to put these 5G small cell antennas in at close range. And that means, as we see here on some of these illustrations or photos here, on poles, on street lights, hanging on wires, putting them under manhole covers, wherever they can put these in, to put them like every 2 to 12 houses, literally at bedroom height, right outside where we're expecting to get a good night's sleep. And we know this is going to screw us up because it's a light energy form and our body's waiting for darkness. So their goal is to have them everywhere, millions of them. And we've gotten reports where literally they come in under the cover of darkness and start lopping off the trees or removing the trees altogether to put these cell towers in outside of our bedrooms at the same time that our cities are deciding they need to plant more trees to create a canopy to cool our cities. So it makes no sense on so many levels, but this is a new revenue stream for the industry, and it's not safe. Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut, he's our US Senator from Connecticut, he was at a commerce hearing on this very topic, and he said to these two industry representatives, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in independent testing of this technology before it came to market? And after hemming and hawing for a couple of minutes, they both kind of hung their heads and said, well, we don't actually know of any testing that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's the state of affairs. And then Computer World and others who track this technology say it's a bad joke. We're not really even getting any better service than we already had with toxic 4G. But there goes Verizon boasting a year ago that they're now bringing this to 100 million people. And look at this map of just Boston alone. This is not the big macro towers. This is the additional layer of electro pollution from all these small cells that are coming into our neighborhoods. And as Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown identified in their research during COVID, our biological cells only have so much energy. That energy is used to get us through our regular day-to-day and then at night to do cell repair and regeneration. When we expose ourselves to environmental pollutants, that's an added burden. So what happens when we radiate ourselves 24/7? Our poor bodies can't keep up. And then you bring in something like COVID-19, a virus on top of that. And their study concluded that where there are high levels of radiofrequency radiation during COVID, we had higher death rates from COVID and higher case rates. Now, we're not saying that 5G caused COVID. What we are saying is that 5G is an added body burden. And then when you have something like COVID-19, it makes it really hard for a lot of bodies to recover. So Dr. Magda Habas, she was the co-chairwoman of the EMF Medical Conference. She is a professor emeritus, which means she retired from Trent State University with honors. And she is a scientist who taught electromagnetic fields for 25 years at her university. She recognizes that most governments have dropped the ball on this, and nobody is monitoring the cumulative exposures, because RFCC guidelines account for one antenna from one device for 6 minutes or a half an hour. That's it. Nobody is monitoring this 24/7 exposure from multiple devices, hundreds, thousands of devices at once. So Dr. Habas has started her global EMF monitoring project, and she invites all of us to consider becoming citizen scientists. And if you can invest yourself or with friends or loved ones or colleagues with one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 RF detection meters, then you can go to her website at globalemf.net and sign up to do these studies with her. And I've contributed a number of these findings here throughout Massachusetts and a number of towns. Deb, who's our co-host tonight, she and I went around her town of Stratham, New Hampshire, and then we went up to the capital at Concord, New Hampshire during the pandemic, where there were very few people around, and even just the electro pollution from the wireless infrastructure already had them in the red zone. So Dr. Habas calls this her brag project. Can you brag about your town? So black stands for the B. Anything over 100,000 microwatts is very high. Red is 10,000 to 100,000 microwatts. That's really high. A is for amber, 1,000 to 10,000. And G is for green. There was a group of scientists who got together years ago in Salzburg, and they came up with a declaration that provided you have a safe space to heal in your own privacy, we could probably still do okay if we got signals down to 1,000 or less outdoors in our communities. So that's the goal. So anybody who wants to invest in one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters and help with this study, contact Dr. Habas and her team at globalemf.net. And the wonderful gentleman, Rob Metzinger, who owns Safe Living Technologies and makes this meter, he's offering a discount to citizens. And I think for me, instead of paying $400, I think I paid somewhere around $308 for this meter. So reach out, let them know you want to be a citizen scientist, and you may be able to get that discount. So what do our communities actually look like today? The goal, again, is to be less than 1,000. Up in New Hampshire, I think it was Lori Schreier, who's one of the members of New Hampshire for Safe Technology on their leadership team. She went near her town at the fire station and measured. That was in the green. In Keene, New Hampshire, they measured, and it was over 7,000. And we now know they're putting those 5G small cells in at the curb, and we suspect that number has increased. Nashua was already in the red. Concord was in the red. Stratham, New Hampshire, they've got a massive cell tower right down the main drag. In the black here in Boston. If anybody has come to Boston, you may have gone into the North End, which is where all of our wonderful Italian restaurants and bakeries are. And you'll notice that above the storefronts, there are living quarters. This seemingly pretty wrought iron streetlight is actually a cell tower. And when we measured near these, right at the sidewalk where thousands of tourists go every day, we were over 500,000. And this is what our cities are getting polluted with today. So that's all the bad news, you guys. Let's talk about positive solutions, because we have so many people with boots on the ground working from so many angles. And Martin Luther King Jr. framed it up for us very nicely. He said, when meaningful change ultimately happens in our society, it comes through three areas. One, the public gets informed and starts taking charge of things from where they are. That's what we're hoping to inspire everybody to do tonight. Two, it goes through the courts, and the guilty are found guilty and held accountable. And public policy eventually catches up with, in this case, the science. So I'll leave you with my slides in a couple of days, and you can go through the next slides at your own pace and really drill down to what the good work is that so many people are doing. But I'll talk us through some of the highlights. There are lawsuits happening left and right, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. And the FCC has been sued by the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others. They were all rolled together into this one lawsuit called the Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC. And the judges, these three judges, were presented with 27 binders, 11,000 pages of scientific evidence of harm that has been entered into the public record with the FCC, showing harm, serious harm. And so when Dr. Shuren went over to the FCC and said, oh, we can ignore that National Toxicology Program study, there's no need to change our radiation exposure limits. When the FCC took that advice from the FDA, and they entered it into something called the Federal Register, that's when the lawsuits happened. So the courts said to the FCC, well, show us your homework. How did you determine it's still okay to radiate at these levels? And they said, well, the FDA said it was okay. So the courts, of course, asked, well, where is the FDA's homework? And there is none. Not one of our federal agencies has done the top to bottom investigation on man-made radio frequency microwave radiation. We used to have some really good, highly qualified experts back in the 90s. And then in 1996, the industry got in there and they came up with this Telecom Act of 1996 that basically put a clause in there saying, if anybody is concerned about environmental impacts, too bad you can't sue us. And so shortly after that, we found that all these wonderful programs that were doing the true investigation with the EPA, the CDC, all those got defunded. So the industry has deep pockets and heavy influence, but now they're getting sued. So feel free, and the judges came back and remanded it back to the FCC to account for the harm to our children, to our pollinators and the whole environment, to the elderly, account for infertility and all this. That was 2 years ago in August. And for 2 years, the FCC has done nothing. So we cannot wait for the cavalry to come. We are the cavalry. We have to start this conversation at the local level. But look at all these other lawsuits. I want to highlight a couple things. Americans for Responsible Technology is a wonderful group of environmental protectors. Patty and Doug Wood lead that up with grassroots environmental education. This project, Americans for Responsible Technology, they have a whole toolkit that you can use to start this conversation credibly in your town. They also went up to the FDA and said, you need to do better. You are obligated to protect us. So there's a petition there that you can sign on to. And then I mentioned that cell tower in Pittsfield, where for the first time in the United States, the Board of Health investigated, and they came up with a 28-page report, I think. They document the science. They document the medical diagnoses of harm. They document what the engineers are telling us. We know these should not be mounted near our homes and anywhere else that's sensitive. And they also documented what the industry expert said. This Dr. Eric Swanson gets paraded around by the industry. He's a PhD, so who wouldn't believe him? They investigated him. And the Board of Health in Pittsfield found out that he has not one shred of expertise in this area. He has never published one single study on the biological effects of man-made radiation. He is a PhD in physics. He has no medical expertise. So they documented that he's pretty much a fraud as well. So this cease and desist order is a really good document for you to take to your town to show your Board of Health that it is their job to protect us. And what it turns out that we think has happened is that Telecom Act of 1996 that the industry hides behind looks like it only applies to the application process to put these cell towers in. Once something comes into the community and it's a nuisance or a pollutant or a toxin, then the jurisdiction goes to the Board of Health. It is their legal obligation to protect you. So now there's a lawsuit out in Pittsfield because the mayor and the city council refused to back their Board of Health after they told them to do this investigation. They refused to back them with the funding to take it to court. So now the citizens are suing, and bless Children's Health Defense. They are a team of attorneys who have been taking on environmental polluters since 2018. And they have taken this lawsuit on for the citizens of Pittsfield to get these families back home and get their Board of Health reinstated with this cease and desist order to do their job. So all sorts of amazing things are happening all over the world. So that's the courts. Now policy solutions. So I mentioned we've had bills in Massachusetts for more than 10 years. Other states have had bills as well through the good work of our co-host tonight, Deb Hodgson, and her state representative, Patrick Abrami at the time. We got the first law passed in the United States to investigate, and it included these very pointed questions. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others already walked away from this very high risk like asbestos? They don't cover for damages. That should be a huge red flag to all of our communities and our legislators. Why does that legal fine print that we looked at even exist? Why does the FCC drop the ball on this? Why does the FCC allow 100 times more radiation than what certain other countries do? And why is nobody looking at this cumulative effect when our guidelines only pertain to one device? And that is not how technology is deployed today. So long story short, we got this bill passed in less than a year. They formed a commission. Even during the pandemic, they investigated. They made 15 recommendations in this groundbreaking report that you'll find at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our state efforts page. If you can bind this and take it with you to your meetings, this is probably the best document. This and the Pittsfield Board of Health findings are highly credible, and they tell us that this is not safe. And they make 15 recommendations to get this stuff away from close range, educate the public, get this out of our schools, our libraries, all of our public spaces, and start bringing in fiber optics to the premises and hook up with cabling indoors, turn off the antennas, problem solved. So they've come up with some bills to start trying to enact their recommendations, but at every turn the industry gets in with their deep pockets and economic promises, and they derail these bills. But Frank Clegg sent in testimony that's really good, highly credible for you to print out at this link. It's only a few pages. But he says wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It's outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. We should be doing fiber to and through the premises and deferring to wireless for a small amount of time as we can and keeping things in airplane mode otherwise. So we've had some inroads in New Hampshire, but the industry got in there and has derailed things. But we'll keep trying. And every time, some will say every time God closes a door, he opens a window. And just as we had industry blow up this bill this session to restore local control to our towns, I was contacted by State Representative Tracy Quint in Maine. She's a nurse and understands biological impact when she reads the science. And her adult children and her constituents were starting to talk to her about EMFs. So she started looking. She reached out for some support from us, and we helped her with this bill this session. The industry got in there and tried to take out language about non-ionizing radiation, but it's that non-ionizing radiation that is hurting us. And she stood her grounds and said, no, that would be foolish of us to let them take that out. So we're waiting to hear what happened with this bill. Connecticut had a great bill about protecting people from small cells and smart meters at their homes. But again, they killed that bill before it even got to go anywhere. Here in Massachusetts, we have 6 bills. The first 4 here, we have had filed for many years. We've gotten them out of early committees, but then they haven't converted into laws. We would form a commission just like New Hampshire did. We want to protect our kids from handheld devices. We want to protect our kids in the schools. We want to protect ourselves from these smart meters that the industry is telling us they're going to be putting on all of our homes in the next year or two. And Senator Michael Moore has put an emergency preamble on this to address the health effects. And then we have 2 new bills. We've got some pretty good civil rights language in our laws here in Massachusetts, but this would give people with disabilities the right to ask for accommodations when trying to access society in hotels or at the grocery store or wherever else they deserve to be out and about in our world, instead of having to be shut-ins because we've gotten so polluted. So this would strengthen our civil rights, not just for electromagnetic illnesses, but for all disabilities. And then this bill we've had a hearing on already. Out in Pittsfield, where Courtney Gilardi has been the parent champion under that Verizon cell tower. She worked with her state legislator and the attorney who sued the FCC, and they came up with language to say, look, our state already tracks other illnesses like Parkinson's or like COVID or food poisoning. It's time that we get electromagnetic illnesses in that registry. So when citizens go to their local board of health, they have someplace to report this. When a patient goes to the doctor and says, I think I'm electrosensitive, the doctor can put that into the database. And we need to get good data, because once we have better data, we can make better decisions. So we, for whatever reason, move like molasses here in Massachusetts, but it's critically important that we build the public record. So as each one of these bills come up for public hearing, we put out a call to action. So we encourage people, just take an hour, write down your story. Why do you care about this? Did you get sick? Did somebody you know get sick? Did they die from a brain tumor? Or do you just not want to be exposed, because prevention, is worth a pound of cure, right? An ounce of prevention. So get your story, write it out, a page or 2. These guys in the legislature are really busy. They've got thousands of bills they need to get through every session. But if you can get a statement prepared, when each of the bills comes up, we can let you know who to submit it to. And then you can just modify it briefly to suit whatever particular slice of this is up before the legislature. So let's band together, let's support one another in our communities. And at this link in my research repository, you can also see what all the other states are doing. So the industry comes in and tries to tell us, oh, nobody else cares about this. It's, it's just the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people. Well, that simply is not true. Americans for Responsible Technology at this link shows there are more than 150 groups all over the country already organizing to protect themselves at the local level. So you can go out to this link and see, is there a group near you? And you might be able to just join efforts with them, or if there is nobody, they have a whole toolkit for how to start your own group. So all around Massachusetts, there are so many people who have been working this, but because mainstream media is owned by these companies, we simply don't hear about it. So we're here to give you the facts. Towns themselves, municipal agencies are taking action. So lots of, same thing. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured out what 5G was, took it to her local board. They had a doctor on their board. They put a moratorium in place. So lots of things happening all over the world that you can bring to your towns to say, I know it sounds like tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but look at this. Look at what New Hampshire did, right? Look at what New Hampshire did. Look at what Pittsfield did. Look at what Ashland Public Schools did, and give them the facts. And you can't just drop the ball and run, because they were already too busy when you walked in the door. We have to diplomatically carry the ball the entire way. So I was so grateful to learn that this session, a doctor in Louisiana brought this issue to her schools, and she had talked to some of the experts in the EMF space who said, you know, we have tried, and as soon as you bring up the radiation issue, ed tech gets in there and squashes you like a bug. So she was encouraged to start where she is. Dr. Holly Grove is an ophthalmologist. She was fellowship trained in corneal surgery, and she has 4 children, and she's been able to do a lot of investigating on this issue while she's been raising her kids. And so she worked with her legislators. They got beat up pretty good the first time. Then she doubled down and went back and got a bunch of other doctors with specialties in other areas like heart, brain, eyes, you know, lifestyle. And together, these doctors banded together and got this bill passed unanimously through the Senate, through the House, signed by the governor, that the state level education and technology authorities had to work with the schools and come up with best practices for using digital technology. Now, they didn't take on the EMFs directly, but they're striking a better balance between screen time and how children are supposed to be learning, because the experts in the science will show us children do not learn well behind a screen. They need to have meaningful interaction with other humans. They need to have physical touch. They need to have physical movement, and they need to be out in nature, not behind screens. And so we're so grateful to see this progress. We just got news reports out of the Netherlands and Finland that they are removing technology from the schools. Meanwhile, ed tech got in there and foisted the 21st century classroom on our kids. But look at this expose series that the New York Times did. Silicon Valley execs are banning screens from their children. They're sending their kids to schools with no technology, and they're making their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens anywhere near their children. So again, solutions for everything. Our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education, they have the Americans for Responsible Technology project. They have also started the Tech Safe Schools project. Reach out to them. They will look up your schools. They will send a packet of information to lend credibility, what the legal risks are that they assume by radiating the kids and the staff, what the health risks are, and most importantly, solutions to have the level of technology that you think you need, but without the radiation. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has developed kindergarten through grade 12 curriculum already on prevention for Wi-Fi and cell phones. So that's already developed. Dr. Alexia McKnight, the veterinarian radiologist who got so sick from her smart meter, she and I were invited into her children's school district for Professional Development Day, and we gave 3 or 4 presentations throughout the day to all the teachers who signed up for these courses. And we just sat there and taught. So there is professional development curriculum already right here as well. And as I mentioned, my partner Miko Ahonen and I have developed an online course that can be taken by the entire school district in less than a half an hour. And it presents a tip sheet at the end, along with a certificate of completion to give to the Human Resources Department to show that you have completed your training. So, and our friends at Environmental Health Trust have a wealth of documents that you can print out, postcards, 1- and 2-page info sheets and stuff. So many, many resources to help you have these challenging conversations. The first textbook has now come out for medical school. Physicians for Safe Technology, Dr. Cindy Russell has put up a website where healthcare practitioners can come along with her and learn about this. And then we have all these other amazing resources for other professionals who think that Wi-Fi is safe. Okay. So for home and work, some people are do-it-yourselfers. Some people are horrified at the thought of even having to address this. So please know there is an entire professional career field called building biology consultants. They are highly trained to come into your home or your school or your workspace and measure the indoor pollutants, the water, the mold, the VOCs, all of it. And then there are those who went for further training to be certified in electromagnetic radiation specialty. So you can go to their directory here and see if you can consult teleconsulting, or if there's somebody in your area. You're very lucky, because we need far more of these guys. This award-winning film, Generation Zapped, is 74 minutes. It's now on Amazon Prime, and most library streaming services now offer this. Stream it, download it to your devices, turn off the antennas, and then enjoy watching it. Do a screening in your living room with your friends and family, with your colleagues at work. Invite in the parents of the kids that your kids hang out with. Start a group of informed citizens before you try and go and talk to the decision makers. Look at this. Camilla Reese, Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe, and others did 2 half-hour episodes on PBS with Bert Wolf. And here's that toolkit that you can go use to start this conversation credibly. And, we have to really start looking at this for ourselves, but realize that we are modeling behavior. Our children are no dummies. Monkey see, monkey do. If they see you in front of your screen all the time and not giving them quality time, you've just given them permission to be hiding out in their screens, when that is not how a child develops properly. So we have to model good behavior. Love this poster, 50 Ways to Take a Break. It just reminds us of how full and beautiful our lives were before we got stuck behind a screen. And then Dr. Laura Conover wrote this amazing book that takes us through all 4 seasons of how we can reconnect naturally to the Earth's healing energies. And here in the Northeast, we can't be barefoot outside. So she teaches us many ways to ground naturally without having to take our shoes off. So excellent resources. Our goal should always be to get to as low as reasonably achievable. That's the ALARA principle, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already uses that for the other radiation that breaks the atom, the ionizing radiation like X-rays in the sun and gamma rays. It's time we apply that now to this newer man-made energy. So we've got all sorts of resources here for our municipalities. Always make sure that we measure, and not against those goofy FCC limits, because they aren't safe, but from the biological limits. And here's what the science tells us. So we've got all these facts at our fingertips. So for next step, let's not kid ourselves. This is a toxin. There is no safe level of man-made microwave radiation. Dr. Linda Birnbaum is now retired, but she was heading up the National Institutes at the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, and she oversaw the National Toxicology Program when that groundbreaking study was done. And she said, yes, we do have some captured agencies, but we still do have some very good public servants at the federal level. But in order for them to take action, they have to be empowered by us. We have to create the ruckus at the grassroots level. We have to create that at the state level and push that up to the federal level so that they are compelled to make the changes. So let's educate. We do these free public education webinars twice a month. Go out to Mass for Safe Technology on our events page. Get these invitations, print them out, put them up all over your town, your gym, your schools, your workroom at work, the staff room. Put them up in your town hall, in your library, at your senior center, at your civic organizations. Start planting these seeds and inviting everybody into this conversation. I can be brought in with myself or with others. We've done regional seminars, custom tailored to whatever the needs are in your community. And please, we should not be sending our kids back to school in this toxic radiation where more and more children are going to hit that tipping point and get sicker and sicker. TechSafe Schools has this amazing toolkit right here for you to use to start the conversation. So start where you are. Start with your family. They're going to think you're crazy. Show them the science. Get a meter. Show them their exposures. And then if you belong to professional associations, they're always looking for public speakers. So I am more than honored to be brought in to help everybody learn. Next steps. Every town, now that tech is here, should be forming safety communities or committees around it. We need to teach them to make sure we have no fee opt-outs on these smart meters, and we need to get them to start transitioning to safe technology in our communities. We have a lot of really good attorneys that represent our towns, but most of them are way out of their league when it comes to the telecom industry. And most are used to hiring experts where they don't have their own expertise. So somebody like Andrew Campanelli used to work for the telecom industry until he figured out the harm that was being put into our communities. He switched teams and now he represents municipalities, individuals in courts, and he routinely rewrites zoning code for towns. He will take the time to look at what's on the books in your town currently, what's on the books at the state level, and he knows the federal ins and outs. And so he can, I think his fee is like $8,500. He can be hired to come in and rewrite your town zoning so that you are as protected as you can be under current law, because Congress left us with like 20 things we can do to protect ourselves. But the industry comes in and says, oh, it's the law. You have to let us put these cell towers up willy-nilly. And that is not the fact. The fact is we have a lot of power. Our towns just don't know it. So hire somebody to do that work for us. So for today, just start noticing, what do you have that's wireless? Start with baby steps. Above all, create a sleep sanctuary, because if your body can't repair at night, it's going to hit a tipping point for most of us. And then make your way to the Ethernet cables and adapters from your router, get the Ethernet switch and just hook everything up and turn off the antennas and measure. And use airplane mode more often than not. And use all these resources. These are some of the great 1 or 2 pagers that Environmental Health Trust has to help you open these conversations. And even just to put up reminders for yourself, stick them on your fridge, hang them up at work. So thank you, everybody. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose. It's a lot of information to take on at once. So a lot of people will come once, they'll go start making some changes, and then they'll come back for another cup of courage. They'll listen again, and then they'll take away something more, or they'll invite their friends and their loved ones and their colleagues to come back the next time. They'll send it to their town. They'll ask them to please come and learn. So we have the solutions. We have the resources to help you, but we can't do it for you. So reach out to us at these links. This New Hampshire for Safe Technology is their Facebook page. You can email them directly here. I have a website here. No need to reinvent the wheel. If you like what we've done on our website, I can put you in touch with the person who built this for us. We're more than honored to have you replicate it and fill it with whatever customizes it for you. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to get education out there as quickly as possible. And click on the Join Our Efforts. People can get on my distribution list for that. I try not to pollute the inboxes, but when there's something actionable that we can all take a couple minutes to help lift this issue together, I'll send that out, and then I'll send announcements for where there are educational opportunities too. And you can reach me at ma4safetech@gmail.com. So thank you, everybody. I'll stop the screen sharing and we'll come back and see if Deb's been able to monitor the chat to see if there's any questions, or if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand. And we've got about 5 minutes left, and we can entertain questions.
There are no questions in the chat, but if anybody has one, feel free. Sydney.
Okay. Sydney, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Mute. Okay. Oh, great. That Health in Buildings, the roundtable conference. I went onto your website while you were introducing it, and I don't know exactly where to find it on your website. What's the hierarchy?
That is actually over on my YouTube page.
Oh, you have a YouTube page.
I do have a YouTube page. You know, when I fell down the rabbit hole, I never imagined I would need any of this. So I just did everything under my name because I didn't know I was going to have to establish Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So I just have my own YouTube page under Cecilia Doucette, and you'll find it there. You might even just be able to do a search with my name and Health and Buildings Roundtable, and it might pop up that way.
Okay.
But yeah, otherwise it's in my slides. And if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and you go to our events page, we have a link to all of these webinars that we've done over the last year or two. And when you pull up one of these webinars, in the description of the video on YouTube, it has links to my slides. So if you really want to get my slides right now, you could just go to my events page and you'll see the link where you can look at all of our webinars and you can grab these slides right away.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And hey, Sydney, I want to give you a shout out because I know you've been working really hard at the federal level with Odette Wilkins and the attorneys. And there's a really horrific bill and a bunch of sister bills at the federal level. And I think if you want to just take a minute and tell us about that and what folks can do to start telling their towns that there's an effort going on that our towns can join in on to try and stop these terrible bills at the federal level.
Oh, okay. Well, I think you can find more information on Californians for Safe Technology. You have to kind of go to the right where it says more. You scroll down and where it says HR 3557, and then that will bring up more information. I know that's kind of a quick way to say it. And Odette Wilkins, who runs the national call, is in the process of having a website put up. And she said it should be ready within a week, we hope. Well, she hopes, I should say.
Yeah, that's excellent.
So all that will be on there. And we hope to get a link to that legal webinar. So far, I think what's hanging it up is there was some things that were said that, these are attorneys, so they have to make sure everything they say is just perfect. And if something is a little misleading, so Ben Levy, who is working with Julian Gresser, the attorney, he's making sure it's going to be perfect. Okay. So far, we don't have the perfect version of the legal webinar, but that was just last Wednesday, which was excellent and talked about these bills. That's the education right there. So.
Yeah. And so it's so powerful because these are top level attorneys from around the country. And that video is going to be something that we're going to be able to share with our town board of select persons, our city councils, with our zoning board, our planning board, our health board, because if these federal laws go through these bills, it's going to strip every shred of local control we have today. So one of the things that they advise in that legal webinar is right now, today, under current law, get your zoning as strong as you can right now. Protect yourselves, because these federal bills, they're going to strip us of everything. So get it as strong as you can right now, and you may have some chance of fighting it at the local and state level if those federal things go through. So it's critical, it's urgent, it's invisible. We don't know about it, but they're not going to know about it if we don't raise our voices together and start educating. So Sydney, thank you so much for everything you've been doing at that level and helping Odette and the others.
Oh, also Doug Wood, Americans for Responsible Technology. If you just pull that up, Americans for Responsible Technology, right there on his homepage, he has HR 3557. You can click on that. He's got that 1-minute video about what you can do, and lots of information about it. And at the bottom of that HR 3557, it's easy to find if you just pull up his website right there.
That's excellent. I actually just sent that to somebody today who is asking, how can they tell their town about this? So as we've said, folks, we created this mess. We can fix this mess. So please share this video when you receive it, share my slides, start the conversation, let us know how we can help. And I want to thank Deb Hodgson again for all of her wonderful work and her indomitable spirit, for sharing her experience of how she healed herself simply by removing the wireless from her home. So good luck, everybody. Let us know how we can help. And we hope you have a tech safe night. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
You.